For years now, the Indian state of Manipur has been engulfed in this really devastating cycle of ethnic violence. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down this complex and frankly tragic conflict. We'll look at the people involved, the deep rooted causes, and the aftermath of the violence that has literally torn a state apart. Okay, first things first. Let's start with the human cost, because it's so important to remember that every single number here represents a life lost. According to the official figures as of late 2024, we're talking about more than 258 people killed. And that right there just tells you how serious this is. And the impact goes way beyond those killed. We're talking about over 60,000 people, 60,000 forced to flee their homes, leaving everything they've ever known behind. This isn't just some clash, it's a total breakdown of society, and it's created this massive internal refugee crisis. So, how on earth did things get to this point? To really get it, we've got to look at the communities right at the heart of the conflict, and the very geography that separates them. Okay, so this conflict is primarily between two main groups. On one side, you have the Métis people. They're the majority community in the state. They're predominantly Hindu, and they live mostly in the central Imphal Valley. And then on the other side, you have the Kuki-Zo. Now, they're a collection of tribal communities. They're predominantly Christian, and they live in these vast hill areas that surround that central valley. And this is where things get really interesting, because this chart visualizes the core tension perfectly. Look at this. The Imphal Valley, where the Métis live, that's just 10% of Manipur's RAND, but it's packed with 57% of the population. Then you have the hills, home to the Kuki-Zo and other tribes. That's 90% of the land, but with only 43% of the people. You can just see it, right? It's a demographic pressure cooker, and that is absolutely central to everything that follows. Now, these tensions over land, resources, and identity, they've been simmering for decades. But it took one single legal development to act as the spark, the one thing that lit the fuse. But wait, before we get to that spark, we need to understand a really crucial term: scheduled tribe status, or ST status. So in India, this is a constitutional designation. It gives communities certain affirmative action benefits and this is critical for this conflict, special protections over their land. The key rule here is that non-tribals just can't buy land in areas designated for scheduled tribes. And here it is. This is the trigger. In April 2023, the Manipur High Court directed the state government to consider the Métis community's long-standing demand to be granted that very same scheduled tribe status. And that one directive, well, it set shockwaves across the entire state. The reaction was just immediate. On May 3rd, 2023, tribal groups, led by the Kuki-Zo, they organized this massive tribal solidarity march to protest the court order. So what happens next? The Métis groups respond with counter-protests. And then, at a really tense border between districts, clashes break out. And what started with, just stone throwing, it quickly escalated into arson, and the violence just spread like wildfire across all of Manipur. But, a fire that big needs fuel, right? That court order, that was just the spark. The fuel for this inferno had been gathering for decades, built on this foundation of mutual fear and competing interests. So let's look at the Métis perspective. For them, this demand for ST status is a defensive move. You have groups like the STDCM who argue that it's absolutely necessary to protect their land, their culture, and their identity, which they feel are under threat in their small valley home. And here you see the flip side of the coin, the exact opposite view. The Kuki-Zo and other tribes see the very same demand as an existential threat. They believe it's just a strategy, a ploy, by the more populous and politically powerful Métis to get the ability to buy up their ancestral lands in the hills and, effectively dispossess them. And there were so many other issues already inflaming the situation. For instance, the state government had been conducting these eviction drives in the hills, claiming villagers were encroaching on forest land. At the same time, Métis groups were raising alarms about what they called illegal immigration from neighboring Myanmar, because the Kuki-Zo are ethnically related to the Chin people right across the border. Then you had a government war on drugs targeting poppy cultivation, which many Kukis saw as just a pretext to target their communities. And all of this was happening in an environment where armed militias on both sides were getting stronger and stronger. It was a tinderbox. So let's see how this buildup of fuel just exploded. Because when the violence began, it was swift, it was brutal, and it engulfed the entire state in chaos. Just look at this timeline.
It shows a terrifying escalation. In May 2023, the first riots break out and mobs loot thousands, literally thousands, of sophisticated weapons from police armories. This turned what were ethnic clashes into a full-blown armed conflict. Then, in July, this horrific viral video of two Kuki women being sexually assaulted by a mob that finally grabbed widespread national attention. The political fallout was huge, and after 20 months of nonstop violence, the chief minister finally resigned, which led the central government to step in, impose what's called president's rule, and take direct control of the state.
The scale of the physical destruction is just staggering. We're talking nearly 5,000 houses burnt to the ground, around 400 churches, mostly in the valley, and over 130 temples were damaged or completely destroyed, and more than 1,100 people were injured. The violence wasn't just targeting people, it was targeting the very fabric of their communities.
So here's the most crucial takeaway from all this. The conflict has physically redrawn the map of Manipur along ethnic lines. A near-total ethnic separation has actually happened. Métis who used to live in the hills have fled to the valley, and Kuki-Zo who lived in the valley have fled to the hills. The state is now, for all intents and purposes, completely segregated. So even after the central government imposed direct rule, the aftermath is just a crisis without any clear end in sight. Let's take a look at the official responses and the security situation as it stands now. So the country's Supreme Court actually stepped in. They called the initial police investigation tardy and basically said there was a breakdown of constitutional machinery. The court even formed a special committee to oversee relief for victims. Eventually, that president's rule was lifted and a new state government was installed in early 2026, tasked with the incredible challenge of navigating this broken landscape. One of the key government responses has been to directly address those immigration concerns that were raised by Métis groups. The state has launched a major crackdown. They formed special task forces in every single district with clear orders. Identify, restrict, and deport undocumented foreign nationals. And make no mistake, the armed conflict is not over. Security operations are still ongoing. In fact, as recently as mid-2025, India's National Investigation Agency arrested several Kuki insurgents in connection with an attack that killed police commandos. This just goes to show you that the cycle of violence and retribution is still very, very active. Which brings us to this final, really haunting question. After so much bloodshed, so much destruction, and a complete separation of communities, what could a path to peace in Manipur possibly even look like? Right now, there are just no easy answers in a state so profoundly broken by this conflict.